It's already been 6 months since the last episode in my small container series. Sorry about that, I'm always short of time. In this video, I'm going to show you what's happened to them during the last 6 months. This is where we left off last time. I was growing these containers under a fluorescent T5. These seedlings had previously had a rough start under a super cheap LED shop light, not specifically designed for plants. Even though that tube was advertised as cool white, the light spectrum and light output must have been completely wrong for plants, as the cacti grew very thin and yellowish. I had purchased a bunch of these cheap LED shop lights for a paint booth, and I was curious to see how they would fare at growing plants. Well, terrible. Under the fluorescent T5, the plant returned to a nice green color, as well as regained some width. Shortly after uploading the previous episode in this series, I decided to get my old Spider Farmer 4000 out of storage and give it another try, since many of you guys have had success using grow lights from that brand. The plan was to carry on growing my small containers under it, and also start a new batch of seeds also in small containers. In all honesty, for the few containers that you see here, a Spider Farmer 1000 would have been more than enough, but I don't have one. All I have is that enormous Spider Farmer 4000 that can cover a much larger area and give out much more light than I would ever need. To make the most of that power, I brought a selection of all the plants from outside so that they can carry on growing during the winter. A lot of monstrous and rare varieties. Some of them are very neat, and one day I hope to produce seeds out of them. I decided to place the plants on the floor so that people cannot see the grow light from the street. I don't want my neighbors to think I'm growing cannabis. I also placed some mylar film on the sides to reflect the light. I'll tell you frankly, this was not a great setup, because it was really hard to access the plants, should I need to inspect a pot or to water them. It's much better to place them higher up on a table with some space to walk around. But this room is so narrow that even if I were to raise the plants, there would not be enough space to walk around. This used to be a small terrace, and the previous owner installed windows to turn it into a room. But there is one advantage though, for growing plants in this room. Since it used to be an outdoor area, the doors going to the apartments are isolated and weatherproof. Therefore, there has been no issue whatsoever with humidity from the grow spoiling my apartment, such as for instance mold appearing on the walls or around the windows, which can happen when you grow plants indoors. Now pay attention to where I place the plants. The older ones are in the center, where the light is the strongest, and I place the small containers that are still sealed, which contain the youngest plants, more on the outskirts of the grow, as the light there will be much weaker. And if you're wondering why there are pieces of paper kitchen towels on top of some of the plants, they are used to filter the light if some varieties are getting a red tone or a dark tone from too much light. Here, mixed together, you can see two batches of small containers. The first one that was started under that horrible LED shop light, and a new one that was started around Christmas under the Spider Farmer. Those did germinate beautifully. Their color was not as perfectly green as on the fluorescent T5s, but they've grown fine nevertheless. I think I had the dimmer on the Spider Farmer tuned at about 25% for germination, and then afterwards I turned it back down to 20%. Keep in mind that's for the Spider Farmer 4000, which is much more powerful than the Spider Farmer 1000 or 2000. So what's my final opinion on the Spider Farmer? Well, I like it. It's a lamp that allows you to grow them from babies to adult. For that reason, it will be a good choice for those of you who plan to grow indoors all year round. Of course, you may not need such a large model as the 4000. The 1000 would be perfect for most of you. And later on, if you need to expand your grow, you can always get a second 1000. Just avoid the cheaper brands on Amazon. You're better off spending $100 on the Spider Farmer 1000 because the light spectrum will be correct. Not just that, but the light will be much brighter. Don't trust the advertised light outputs of the cheaper models on Amazon. Do I personally have a need for a LED grow light like the Spider Farmer? Not really, because I have the luxury to be able to grow them outside under the sun. The way I like to grow them is start them under a fluorescent T5 and then move them outside. The fluorescent T5's main advantage is that there is no learning curve to it. There is no dimmer, you get good results out of the box as long as you hang it at a height of 12 to 18 inches. With a LED light, on the other hand, it's a bit of a trial and error process to find out the right height and the right amount of dimming needed. You certainly want to have enough light so that they germinate, but you don't want to fry them either. Around late March or early April, I moved all the plants back out on the terrace again as the weather was starting to warm up and I was tired of having such a difficult access to the plants. Half of the containers ended up on this table with some shading fabric on top. This is a setup with good airflow that I've shown in previous videos. The other half of the containers, with the younger plants started under the spider farmer, remained in the same room where it was, but this time under a 2-foot long fluorescent T5. I thought that for these few containers, a fluorescent T5 would be much cheaper to run than my huge Spider Farmer 4000. And besides, when it comes to really young baby plants, my choice will always go to fluorescent T5s over LEDs. That's what I'm used to. As you can see, I placed 2 lamps next to each other, because I was planning to grow another new batch of seeds. But then I never got around to doing it. It's a shame as I really want to grow more of my own varieties, but you guys are doing it for me, so that's one thing at least. If you're wondering, I used a single tube. That's more than enough considering this room receives plenty of indirect light from outside. Since these tubes are 24 watt each, and I'm only using one, that makes for reasonable energy consumptions of just 24 watts. In order to hang the lights, I used a couple of the Muli cloth hangers from IKEA, with a metal piece in between to give them stability. It's not the same model that I showed in my previous small container video. This one is even cheaper. It's called Mulig, and at IKEA stores in the US, you'll find it at just $9.99, which is good value for money, I think. But of course, if you don't mind drilling your ceiling, you can do that instead. That is certainly the cheapest option. That metal piece is actually ideal for the job, as it has notches to hang the lights from. I salvaged that piece from an IKEA portable cloth wardrobe that I was not using anymore. You gotta be creative. Now let's take a look at the plants. They were started from seeds around Christmas under the Spider Farmer lights and were switched to a T5 about 3 months later. The plants are nearly 4.5 months old on these images, which were filmed on the 6th of May, so that's just over a month ago. For those of you who like a fat San Pedro, this cross would be a good choice, as both Sardaniola A1 and Massia can grow fat. I have a video spotlight on Massia, so check it out if you haven't already. Pachanoi mira is not one of my plants, that's why all I can get is open pollinated seeds. The previous batch of seeds, which possibly had Pachanoi mar as a dad, have turned out to be truly beautiful plants, and very, very fast growing. I still have some of those seeds available if you're interested. The more recent batch, which you can see here, could possibly have Colosso as the dad, and I'm sure it's going to be just as awesome as the previous one. I'd be curious to see if it grows as fast. Crosses between Bolivian and Peruvian torches are very cool looking. In this container I'm growing Peruvianus carbonell times Bridgesii tiburon, but the opposite, where tiburon is the mum, is also available. Both crosses will produce long spined plants. A lot of Bridgesii tend to grow thin, but tiburon is not one of them. Check my video on it. Here it is crossed with the very bluish Francis, which also can grow quite fat. Here is another example of tiburon as the mum crossed with a fat Pachanoi. This should be somewhat similar to the tiburon times Francis we've seen previously, since both Francis and Colosso are very bluish and fat, although I think Colosso is fatter than Francis. All crosses with Scopulicola Goliath have been among my most requested seeds lately. If you've watched my recent video on Goliath, you know it's a clone I got from a hippie community in Spain that uses it for ceremonies. It's an extremely fat strain of Scopulicola. My friend Cyril has a cutting of it that is 15 cm wide, that's 6 inches wide. I think that's fatter than any other strain of Scopulicola out there. That thing is a monster. Here we've got it crossed with Francis, which can also reach 5 inches, and that's pretty fat for Pachanoi. Francis is also one of my bluest Pachanoi, which should reflect on this cross when it's older. Goliath is not just super fat. Like all Scopulicolas, it's also spineless. Here it is crossed with Sardaniola A3, which is a very nearly spineless Pachanoi, so you can expect plants that pretty much don't have any spines at all once adult. Oculto is a very bluish Peruvian torch I've had for years, but so far it had not given me any flowers, until last summer. And that's not an isolated case in my collection. I have many adult plants which I've had for years and still have not given me any flowers. This one is for those of you who like spines. Mast 3905 has medium-sized spines with a few really long ones here and there that are over 2 inches in length. 3905 is also a Pachanoi that grows quite fat, and if you want fat of spring, I also have it crossed with Colosso, Massia and Francis, the 3 of which are quite fat. Peruvian torches are by definition bluish. So when you match one with a very bluish Pachanoi, such as Francis, you can bet the children are going to have a nice blue tone when they're older. This is the opposite of the cross we've just seen. And it should be even bluer, since I believe Francis is bluer than Carbonell. It should also have shorter spines, as Francis is the mother. Massia is another plant that comes from that hippie community I mentioned earlier. Since I brought it home, the fresh new growth has shown a very nice blue color, even though it gets quite a lot of sun where it is. It was all green when I got it, because the plants at the community are under full sun all day long, with nothing to filter the light. In fact, some of them are yellow from so much light, and sometimes even burnt. So here in this container, we have two bluish parents. This is going to be another top choice for those of you who love a deep blue tone. Not just that, but both Francis and Massia are fat Pachanois, making this cross an absolute winner. Very blue and very fat. And here are the containers as they are now. I moved them outside about 3 weeks ago. Of course, I could have continued to grow them indoors under the fluorescent T5. But I have a terrace and I thought I would make the most of the nice weather. Here, I've just placed the plants on top of these metal shelves so that I can show them to you better. But normally, they are on the shelf underneath, and the shelving system is covered with green shading material. In this part of the terrace, they are getting sun from morning to mid-afternoon, and that is Spanish sun, which is much stronger than in northern countries. When I moved the plants outside, I immediately started punching holes in the transparent film to get them used to a drier climate. Over the course of the following few days, I punched more and more holes, and then I removed the film completely. The whole procedure took about 10 days and is shown in my video guide on how to grow San Pedro from seeds. Then 2 weeks ago, I raised the level of the soil, like explained in the episode 10 of this small container series. If you remember well, my method involves letting the soil dry up completely, then lifting it in one piece. You then put fresh new soil where the old one used to be, and then you reposition the old soil on top. For the soil to come out in one single piece, it has to be very dry. Also, you can add something to the soil that helps to bind the ingredients together. Personally, I add some local soil from where I live because it sets like concrete. Growing them outdoors is not much more complicated than growing them indoors, but you need to pay attention to the way they look while they progressively adapt from the artificial light to sunlight. It's a big change for them, and they will tell you if they're getting too much light. If they start to show a reddish tone, then add more shading. And once the containers are opened, you don't want to rest the fabric directly on top of them, as this would prevent airflow. I suggest you leave at least several inches between the plants and the shading. This should provide enough airflow to keep the bugs away, at least to some degree. If the wind can pass through, then it's even better. Bugs hate drafts. If you want to buy some of the seedlings that you see in this video, you'll have to wait for another 4 to 6 weeks. They need to grow and toughen up a bit more before I feel comfortable shipping them. This way you can just put them outside in semi-shade and they'll be fine. Or place them under a grow light indoors and they'll be fine as well. And if you want to buy some of the hand-pollinated seeds that I produce myself, please send me an email and I will email you back a list with information, prices and photos. You'll find my email in the description of this video. I will also make it appear on the screen now. It's sanpedromastery@protonmail.com. All the varieties that you see in today's videos are still available, plus many other ones. It's very easy to grow these plants from seeds. Just follow my video tutorial how to grow the San Pedro from seeds and you should be successful. Everything you need to get started is in that video. It's a lot of fun growing cacti from seeds and it's very addictive. All for now my friends, thanks for watching and see you soon with another video.